All right, here we are. It is June 20th. This is our third installment of Travail office hours. Um, just going to give about 2 minutes here to see if anybody shows up. Otherwise, we'll get started. And hello to future watchers of this. Um, if anyone does wander through with questions, we'll be answering those. Um, Otherwise, um, we'll be finishing going through the prestige path ability list in the rulebook, but that's not a great place for us to start for the week. So we're going to go through some of the sort of general game rules first. That will give us the background that we need, in addition to sort of the background that we established last week, going through the path and specialization ability lists. So all of that combined should give us enough background to hit the prestige paths and sort of understand what's going on there in those lists and some of like the special and neat things that those ability lists will let people do. All right, so let's start with combat. For those who choose to participate in combat, we have a pretty comprehensive explanation of what goes on here. As far as combat rules for the game, we start with a general description, right? We're lightest touch, but it is a contact system, so that means when you're in a fight, you're trying to touch your boffer weapon to your opponent and try to prevent them from touching their foam weapon to you, right? And there's also packet abilities like we've discussed in prior weeks, right? You can throw a birdseed filled fabric spell packet at someone. And you can also use safe foam throwing weapons in place of spell packets if you're so inclined to do so. So just an additional friendly reminder here, and we'll get to this in a second too, that every time you're throwing something, whether it's a spell packet or a foam throwing weapon or something, you're spending an ability to do that. And all of those follow the same rules as far as a spell packet or a throwing weapon that strikes a weapon or shield or anything that you're holding is effective. Okay, so right, so focus on safety in combat above all else. Illegal targets are head, neck, hands, groin, and feet. Strikes to those locations don't count. So no one should be aiming for those targets in combat. And if you do strike someone in an illegal target, like you hit somebody in the head or the neck or the groin or something, it's like the expectation is that everything will pause for a moment. We'll make sure everybody's okay, right? We'll make sure everyone is okay, and then right, sort of like apologize, right? We're all going to do it. We'll have an errant shot show up somewhere. Feet, no feet discourages swinging weapons toward the ground where they might strike the ground and deteriorate the weapon. That's I don't know. It's maybe that's sort of a relic of olden times, but strikes toward the feet tend to be at a downward angle. You can't really like come in at like an arc toward the feet. So it's really like it's generally pretty difficult to accidentally hit a foot. And then aiming for a foot requires swinging towards the ground, and swinging towards the ground can damage weapons. So that's that thought. It's worked for a while. It's worked for a long time at at games that the staff has played. So so we're gonna keep that in place. And again, I don't think anybody's gonna accidentally hit a foot. It seems rare. Let's see. The entire combat system is predicated on the honor system, right? You're responsible for keeping track of your own hit points, ability usage, durations of effects in place on you, and no one should be counting those numbers for anyone else, unless you're like a staff member, operating in a capacity where you're like marshaling encounters. Um, so but yeah, expect that not all monsters will have the same number of hit points or the same number of ability uses or whatever. So just keep that in mind. Counting numbers on things is not going to be helpful because they might not be consistent. Also, it's up to the target of things in combat to decide if something was effective or not. And we have some guidelines further in about handling disputes and all that good stuff. So out of game command words, anyone that's been to games before knows these. We'll go over them at Game On, so I'm not going to go into them in too much detail now, but these are things we'll go over in opening meeting. We have them in place to make sure that if someone does get injured or there's a dangerous situation that arises, there's simple codified language surrounding what will happen, so that we can get people whatever help they need or prevent injuries. And then the clarify keyword is there, in case you forget what a thing does. Somebody throws like a harrow at you and you're like, I don't remember what that means. You can say clarify and they'll let you know what it does. So we do have yellow armbands are worn by folks who are not participating in combat, and people who do not wish to be struck with a boffer weapon, or have a spell packet thrown at them at all, for whatever reason. Right? It could be a medical reason. It could be an opt out, completely. And in that case, if someone has a yellow armband on, right, you can just sort of approach them and tell them what like I strike you till you fall down when they're on, and then like they're down, and then you can just like I kill you. It's not it probably won't come up often, that folks with yellow armbands on are involved in combat, but if it does, something happens like that, then you don't actually touch them with anything, you just tell them what happens. So sort of to go along with that, so if you like have a yellow armband on, or you just like don't want to participate in a combat that happens, you can sort of like put your hand on your head and go out of game and step away from it, and whatever the fate of the people who were there in combat is, right, if they win, then you can rejoin them. If everybody dies or something, then you die with them. We can just keep things simple that way if that's an option that people want. Also allows folks to just step out of a combat if they, if for whatever reason, they're not going to participate in it. Also, anytime you're making an attack towards someone that isn't holding any kind of weapons or anything, there's no need to do anything more than literally just like touch them as lightly as humanly possible with a weapon. So even if there is sort of an accidental moment where you like somebody's turned the wrong way, you don't see that they have a yellow armband on their opposite arm or something, and you do go to like swing a weapon at them, you just like touch them, and then it'd be like, oh, like I have a yellow armband. It's like, oh, okay, but like there's no harm could possibly have been done because you're just right. It's just a very light touch. A lot of this is general safety rules. Fight in safe locations, right? Keep an eye out around you. Combat at night or when it's dark out, right? Be extra cautious. Running at night, we are going to use the like out of game I'm running rule, to allow people to, like, if you don't feel safe like running at night, but you would be like running away from an enemy, then you can tell them out of game I'm running, and they will keep a equal distance from you while you're running, while you're like out of game running. and they can continue to pursue you for as long as they want. And But once you're in an area where it would become safe to out of game run again, right? You should be like you let them know that you're going to run. You're going to start running and do like a 3 count. You'd be like out of game, like I'm going to start running again, like 3, 2, 1. Um, Again, that's just there for safety purposes. Um, uh, we ask everyone to be cognizant of NPCs that are in prohibitive costumings, like masks that have obscured visibility coming out of them, or like someone that's like wearing a costume piece that sort of like inhibits movement in some way or another. If you are fighting that NPC and you see them like adjusting like a mask that got like maybe knocked to the side or something, or like there's like a costume thing that's like falling off, they're trying to like get it back on. um it's bad form to continue attacking them in that moment. Just like sort of give them a second um get their like whatever, a cloak or a wig or wings or something. Set back up. We do have rules for well, yes. Speaking of, we do have rules for giant creatures. Giant creatures are represented by staff members that are on stilts. During an encounter with a giant creature, no game effect can cause them to drop to a knee or fall down. So any effect that normally says like drop to a knee or like lie down or whatever, I don't think we have anything that says lie down. I think we have some like drop to a knee stuff though. Those things will not work on a giant creature. Once, if you like defeat a giant creature, it'll still like fall down, right? And then that's sort of very indicative that things are over. It's probably not getting back up after that, but it might. Limb disabling effects, right? Disable and maim don't work on legs of giant creatures. We also ask that like if you're fighting a giant creature, you don't aim for the lower portion of the giant creature's leg, which is where the out of game stilt resides, because that's a potential safety hazard. There's lots of other area to strike. So basically where the real person's foot is and higher is where we ask you to aim for. In this instance, the foot shot counts, right? Because it's not like sort of being swung toward the ground or whatever. So there's not like a magical kneecap like on the giant creature where like shots don't count because it's like the person's foot in a stilt or something. Let's see. Giant creatures have access to a special game call called Carry Through, and we'll get to that when we get to the in-game combat section. But it's here to just sort of remind people that like giant creature, it's part of the special giant creature rules, and also like only giant creatures have like the Carry Through call. I guess there's instances where it could show up elsewhere for something special, but generally like that's where what it's designed for, is for giant creatures, because they need to be like fought differently. Like it doesn't like show up on like regular monsters like in our monster manual or anything. All right, combat distance, right? Keep an arm's length between you and your opponents. Our minimum weapon length is pretty long, 30 inches. So no boffer weapons shorter than 30 inches are going to be used to fight with. So it should be pretty easy to keep correct distance between you and your opponent. We're not going to be allowing combat. We're not going to be allowing bows or really any fired or launched projectiles of any sort, at least not right now. If it's something that people really want, we could revisit that, but for the time being, all of our ranged combat will be through spell packets and safe like foam throwing weapons. And no ranged attacks, like I was saying before, whether with a spell packet or a foam thrown weapon, can be used without using a packet ability. But but again, you can represent your stuff sort of however you want, right? If you're like, you know, let's say you're playing like scoundrel subpathed into like magic user, and you have your like quick cast magic 2 damage packets as a basic. You can be like throwing magic throwing knives or something, right? Because you can be throwing like magic 2 damage packets, but you could throw throwing knives if you wanted, and those will still go through weapons and shields that they strike and stuff. So again, you can represent those things differently, but like you can't just like throw a spell packet or throw a throwing weapon. It has to have a game call accompanying it. So ability speed usage and this sort of will roll into combat speed in the next part too. So in an effort to keep combat organized and keep it so that there's like some air left between game calls, one to like give people a chance to make reactionary calls, and so that one person doesn't use 15 skills in a row and there's no break in the calls that they're making, and now another person wants to make game calls but they can't, and there's just like lots of sound going on and it's difficult to tell what's going on. The rule of thumb is that if you're using an ability, right, which means like you're making a game call, right, 2 damage, you're throwing a packet, magic 2 damage, you're doing your spell incant, and then magic short pain, throwing a packet, you're healing one of your allies or something, right? Like I mend your wounds together, magic heal 2, right? Whatever amount of time it took you to make the game call portion of that, right, which is like the out of game call, that's the magic short pain portion, or the like magic 2 damage portion. For that same amount of time, the expectation is that you will not use any more offensive abilities, right, during that time. And so I guess yeah, so you could still like, it's like, oh, if you like call a 2 damage and then the enemy immediately responds with like a death swing, you can still like use a parry or a dodge or whatever. That's not what this is for. This is to provide space in between like the game calls that you're making, that are impacting other participants, right? And so the easiest way to do that, right, is to just like, you can sort of silently make that game call again, right? So I swing like 2 damage, 2 damage, 2 damage, 2 damage, 2 damage, 2 damage, right? The ones that I'm not swinging on, that's my pause, right? So like 2 damage, 2 damage, 2 damage. And that's like the fastest that I should be making game calls. And the same is true for like, right, I mend your wounds together, magic heal 2, magic heal 2. I mend your wounds together, magic heal 2, magic heal 2. I mend your wounds together, magic heal 2. And it's still like a good clip there, right? You still like regularly be doing things, but it keeps it from, right, it's not like a speed contest, right? There is like a required pause, in between what's going on. And so combat speed, right, where the focus is to keep combat organized, make sure that everyone's placing every shot that they're making. So it's like one attack, like one weapon swing per second, like per opponent that you're fighting, right? So if we're this particularly like on NPC staff side, right, there'll be a lot of times where we're fighting like 3 or 4 people. And when that happens, right, we get like sort of one swing at each target per second. It's sort of hard to like do more than that anyway. But the idea is like, right, and this is right, you get like a swing, right, like 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000, 4 1,000. It's still relatively quick, but it's not, there needs to be like a pause between swings, is what it comes down to, and that will keep things organized and mean that nobody's getting like overwhelmed by a flurry of attacks in rapid succession. Then we hit our section on like combat courtesy, which is basically comes down to, do not fight in a way that causes you or the person fighting you to make unsafe swings in order to make contact, right? So like the you no one should be kneeling unless a game effect requires them to. Everyone should be remaining like upright during combat. You shouldn't be like bending over to put your head where your torso was, because then you're like, right, you're turning a legal target into an illegal target when you do that. Um, right, no one should be making a swing at a location that they can't see. Right, you shouldn't be swinging like behind you blindly, or like spinning or jumping. Any sort of movement where you're not in like full control of where your body is at all times. Um, and then right, also like not like trying to obscure your opponent's vision like with a shield or something. Right, shields need to be held like close to the body. Right, you shouldn't be like raising it up and like putting a shield in your opponent's face so they can't see or something. That's not one, if you're doing that, you're too close to your opponent, and two, that is bad form, and is unsafe for the people involved. um yeah, and so this is like uh the sum of all of this is to make safe combat, right? The when rules like this are followed, right, the instances of accidental illegal weapon strikes is go down basically to zero. um and the ones that do accidentally happen, right, are not injury inducing, if everyone's swinging their weapons at it with an appropriate amount of force. Then even if there is an accidental illegal strike, right, people aren't really going to get hurt by it. And this means that no one is in anyone else's like personal space. Everyone's sort of given like everyone's taking a second between the things that they're doing to sort of like be cognizant of the situation going on around them. And I think everyone's just going to be a lot happier. And combat will be a lot more fun, and people will be able to tell what's going on. So power of swings, right? Like there's no minimum amount of force required, right? You literally just need to like touch your opponent with your weapon in order for an attack to be effective. That's not to say that that like that mere touch is like the upper end of like the amount of force that can be used, right? There's an amount of force more than that that's still like very safe. But people should be pulling their swings, shouldn't be like swinging through hitting your opponent. That's not light as touch, right? You could definitely be using less force than that. And also like some people's idea of what an appropriate amount of force behind a swing is different than others. So if you hear somebody that's like, hey, check your swings, number one, like check your weapon, make sure your weapon's still safe. But also there's people just have a different tolerance, right, for combat intensity. So it's just something worth keeping in mind. Swing arcs should basically be 90 degrees all the time. So after a weapon swing, like the weapon needs to return, right, to basically to an upright position, right, where like weapons should be like the default position for a held weapon in combat should be like perpendicular to the ground, more or less. And then right, like a full, like as full of a 90-degree arc as possible needs to be traveled by the weapon, and weapon arcs shouldn't really ever be more than 180 degrees. If even like 90 degrees is like the sweet spot, that's like what we're aiming for all the time. So boffer weapon lengths, anything up to 46 inches is a one-handed weapon, and should be wielded with one hand when you're fighting. And then anything longer than that is a two-handed weapon, and while you're making attacks with it, it needs to be held with two hands. And that's for purposes of keeping control of weapons. Let's see. I think most weapons out there, most one-handed weapons that are out there that are like mass produced, I think the 46-inch 46-inch limit should be correct. If people run into an instance where we find something that's like a mass-produced weapon that's like 46 and a half or 47 or something, then that's probably fine. It probably has a longer handle or something. But yeah, we can sort of, you know, just reach out to us and we'll figure it out. Um, Injuries and emergencies, right? Hold game and caution. If uh, if we have emergency medical personnel or first aid trained people on site, they'll be pointed out during opening meeting. Asking people to be sort of cognizant of their own physical limitations, right? You know, uh, each individual person knows best what they feel comfortable doing or not. And the this the general stakes, like in a normal fight, are relatively low, right? No one's in danger of like their character perming because of like an offhanded, like an unfortunate encounter with a couple monsters in the woods or something, right? um so just sort of like keep that stuff in mind too. There are times where we're going to want to create dramatic and tense situations, right, where the outcome might have more story wise hinging on things or whatever. But there's no one should really ever feel the need to like push themselves beyond their physical comfort level. And that's certainly not something that we want people doing. It's not something that we encourage people to do. Resolving issues. Misunderstandings are going to happen in combat. You think you connected with an attack, the opponent doesn't. That's like the single most common thing that'll come up. And in those moments, you just kind of like, if you don't agree with somebody, you can take your ability use back. That's very okay. The vast majority of the time, when something happens, just like a simple apology and like pausing to give somebody like a second is like it goes a really long way. And helps remind everybody involved that we all care about the people that are involved here more than whatever story or like physical competition is going on or something. And then if there's instances where people see folks who are being unsafe or not following the rules, bring that to the staff's attention, and we will, and so that we can address it. It's also covered in our code of conduct, that any kind of like cheating or playing, against the intention of the rules, and whatnot, right? That's something that that the staff will enforce. So if that's brought to our attention, we will follow up on it. Um, Weapon and armor guidelines are pretty straightforward. These are technical terms. I'm not going to go over them right now. But the long and short of it is that, right, weapon cores need to be a single piece, right? No hinged or sort of like basically no hinged weapon cores or anything like that. Striking surfaces have to have a minimum amount of foam that have to be on them, right? And that foam can't be exposed. We recommend, if people are able to acquire them, we recommend that people fight with B3 weapons. They're just very safe and very durable. You know exactly what you're getting when you get one. They're light, they're safe, and we're going to be using them. We bought a bunch of B3 weapons for NPCs and staff to be using, so you'll see us with them regularly. But also, if folks want to make their own weapons with PVC, graphite, fiberglass cores, cover them in foam and whatever, that's fine. But anything outside of, so like B3 weapons like will pass inspection, right? As long as you don't like leave them in the heat or the cold or whatever, and the adhesive that's adhering the blade foam to the core doesn't like give way, they're pretty much good to go. So you can feel confident that those are going to be good, and anything that's sort of like similar to that, right? similar to those weapons is also going to be is going to pass inspection. Um, we make no guarantees for foam latex weapons, simply because there are a lot of different companies that make them. There's more now than there ever have been in the past. Even different weapons from the same manufacturers have different foam densities, and different amounts of foam between the core and the striking edge. Um, so if people have them and want to use them, we encourage them. We encourage people to reach out to us first so that we can take a look, at like specifications for these things online to help give people an idea as to whether those will be usable or not. But like any instance where the striking edges are too dense, the weapon is just generally too heavy, um, or the amount of foam between the core and the striking edge is inadequate. So like there's some of the older Calimuscle weapons and Calimuscle weapons that are created for, and there's other brands too that sort of like create um, foam latex weapons or injection molded foam rubber weapons that are designed to be used in like armored LARP combat, and so are designed to support a stronger swing, right? Like not lightest touch style stuff. Those are things that we wouldn't allow, because they're just the striking edges are too dense. Um, so again, right, I encourage people to reach out to us about non like sort of traditional boffer style weapons, so we can let people know. Um, Shields, right? Shields need to be constructed of light materials. No, like if your shield is like there's no like wooden shields just like aren't the thing anymore. It's 2023. We don't have to use wooden shields anymore. You make them out of like corrugated plastic, foam board, other foam materials. If people do decide to purchase shields through B3, then there's they have a chart for the max shield dimensions. Our maximum shield dimension is roughly 24 by 30 inches, um, which allows for like a 24-inch circular shield, but no circular shields larger than 24 inches. And then any shape that fits completely into a 24 by 30-inch rectangle. And so there's a handful of shields that B3 offers. Well, most of the shields that B3 offers that are not like the max, what they title like max coffin shield or max heater shield or whatever. Most of the rest of them are good to go. And there's we understand that there's a lot of like mass produced foam latex shields that have like odd dimensions to them. And so if there's a shield that like doesn't fit into the dimensions of something else, then we can sort of like do some quick calculations to see if it like is roughly the same size or whatever. But basically like we're trying to get away from max dimension shields all over the place. um that's really it. And you'll see everyone will sort of see at the first event that we will not be, when we send out combat encounters, the NPC and staff will not all be wielding like two 46-inch boffers or like a max dimension shield, like all the time. Um and we'll get to another sort of facet of the rules that discourages that, um and encourages people to you know um to not fight with those weapon styles in favor of like being able to get your skills back more easily and have more skills to use. Um, and then just quick armor rules, right? Armors need to not have any surfaces or protrusions or sharp edges that could damage weapons or people, right? We encourage whenever possible safer alternatives to armor materials, right? Like foam, and you can there's what's it called? like vacuum formed plastic armor too is out there and stuff too. That stuff is all all things that we would encourage folks to wear. It's safer. Everyone's going to be a little happier not wearing like full metal armor or whatnot. And there's no sort of penalty for wearing simulated armor. It'll be worth the same amount of stuff, which will be returns to be used against non-backstab melee attacks, and we'll get to that in the in-game rules in a second. And then spell packet construction, right? 6 to 7 inch squares of fabric, like tablespoon or two of bird seed without sunflower seeds or other large sharp seeds and stuff, right? Don't fill it with like cracked corn or something. And then pull it together and then tie it with string or something. No rubber bands. We're gonna do the no rubber bands on spell packets thing. Just another note in here, right, that safe foam throwing weapons can be used in place of spell packets for people that want to do that. All right, now we get to the in-game rules, or the rules for the in-game portion of combat, right, as opposed to the rules for the sort of out-of-game portions of combat that we were talking about up until now. So when if I'm holding my Boffer sword, I want to swing it at an enemy, right? I'm not going to use an ability or anything. I don't have to make a game call. I just can swing it at them. If my swing connects with the opponent before the opponent's body, before striking anything else, right? It wasn't deflected off a shield or a weapon. And so it makes contact. It deals a single point of damage, right? Uncalled weapon swing, 1 point of damage. Nice and easy. Every sort of combat entity in the game, right? Player characters, non-player characters, monsters, whatever, has a finite number of hit points that represent, that represents how many hits that they can take before they fall down, or how many hit points of damage worth of effects they can take before they fall unconscious, right? So it's also possible to have armor points being separate from like the physical armor that we talked about a second ago, right? These would be like from a grant effect, or you might end up with like a special ability at some point that gives your character like a couple points of like natural armor that can be healed like hit points or something. Or monsters might have armor points from something or another. And so every time you take so your armor points and any temporary hit points you have that would also like come from a grant effect, like we sort of talked about that, right? One of the magic user lists gets like a grant 1 armor as a basic, which is probably a thing that people will see a lot. And then one of the devout specializations, right, gets a grant 1 hit point. So that's probably another thing that you will see frequently. So armor points, then temporary hit points, then hit points. That's the order that things are damaged in. So let's say I'm a new character. I have 6 hit points. I didn't take fighter or scoundrel as my path for the event, so I don't get any more hit points from that. I get a grant 2 hit points effect from something. Now I'm up to 8 hit points. And then if I get a grant 1 armor from something, now I'm up to 9. And I have an armor point that gets damaged first. The times where that might matter are few, where you actually have an armor point, but like the Harrow effect cares about you taking hit point damage. So if you get hit with a Harrow effect, then one of the sort of counter plays to that would be to give yourself armor points. And then those armor points would get damaged before your hit points, and so you're not taking hit point damage yet, right? Temporary hit point damage does count as hit point damage during that, right? It's called hit points, so all counts as hit points. So now I'm like at 9, right? I'm in a fight. I get hit with a 2 damage. Now I'm down to 7. I get hit with a 5 damage. Now I'm down to 2. I get hit once with an uncalled weapon strike. Now I'm down to 1. I have 1 hit point left. The last hit point of damage can strike me anywhere on my body. It doesn't have to hit my torso, like it does at some other rule systems. So when I take my last hit point of damage, now I'm at 0 hit points and I fall unconscious and I start to bleed to death. And so during that time, I have 5 minutes to either be healed by somebody, and that'll be through an effect that's like heal X, right? Like heal 2, heal 5, heal 10, heal all. Or if I have like a stabilize ability, I could use that according to the stabilize ability rules. And when that happens, I will regain consciousness. Otherwise, if those 5 minutes passed and nobody heals you and you don't have a stabilize, then you die. The other instances, you might just have been affected by a death effect or a lethal something effect, in which case that just might kill you outright, regardless of how many hit points you had, regardless of other factors, right? It might just kill you outright. It might just kill your character. And then yes, right. And then the other possibility would be you're unconscious on the ground and an enemy puts their weapon to your torso and says death strike 1, death strike 2, death strike 3, and there that process is not interrupted. We'll get to the death strike. The intricacies of the of uninterrupted counts and the death strike. But so 5 minutes pass, or maybe you just died, right? You got hit with a death effect or lethal something, right? Like a I don't know, lethal choke, and it didn't get cured during the duration, and so at the end of it, your character died. Or you fell unconscious and you got death struck. Now you're dead. So once you're dead, you have 5 minutes to be brought back to life by a life effect, which is something that generally shows up on the devout list. If someone takes the devout as their path and has access to ceremonial magic, then they can do 1 per twilight for an ultimate. And then there's other ways to get life effects and stuff. But if you get a life effect, you come back to life at 1 hit point. And otherwise, if those 5 minutes pass, then your body fades and everything you have goes with you. We'll get to that too, but like players can't have their game items taken from them unless like something special happens, or you like decide to give them away or something. We're just gonna remove that aspect of the game. That's not to say that you can't like loot monsters and steal things from NPCs, because you can and will almost certainly do those things. But yeah, so you and all of your things like fade, and you can choose to die and fade early at your discretion, right? As long as you're not doing it to like escape like an in-game consequence of something, right? If you're like the bad guys like caught your character and like knock you down to 0 hit points, you can be like, oh, I'll show them, I'll die and fade immediately, right? Like that's not fun, right? That's not sort of the intention. But like if you get dropped like away from your friends and everybody leaves the area, you can just choose to like die and fade, right? You don't have to lay there alone in the dark for 10 minutes. So when you die, or really when you're lying on the ground dead, like you have some options. So we talked about sort of the general case here where it's like you wait for 5 minutes to get resurrected. And if you don't, right, if a life effect does not find you during that time, then you fade. So the other option here is that you're lying on the ground, your character's dead. You're in the middle of like an important module, let's say, right? And you know that nobody in there with you has a life effect. So you can choose to fade early in that instance. And you should really wait like a minute or so before disappearing, in case like one of the bad guys wants to like animate your corpse or something, to like use against your friends. But if you're in the middle of like a scene or a module or another thing, there's like a big fight going on and you're like deep in the woods, and you know that death, which is going to be like up by the parking lot by ops, like is just like a 10-minute walk away, um, then you can take like at least 3 minutes where you're like out of the action, right? Dead on the ground, or like fade and like step out of the scene, right? Minimum 3 minutes. And then you like can sort of appropriately return into the scene or whatever, right? If you're like in a module, maybe you like find you like go back to like where you guys entered, right? Provided there's like no NPCs or anything going on back there, right? And you can sort of like walk back in, um, and or you can find a staff member and be like, hey, like I died, how can I like get back in? And we'll help you like get back into the scene, appropriately. Um, so you should never write and there's a line in here, right? Returning to a scene after dying should not be done to try to gain a tactical advantage in combat, right? You can't like go behind like the line of enemies and like come back to life like behind the like enemies to like flank them or something, right? The idea is that you can rejoin the action right where everybody is. um and if people ever have questions, and basically i I can't imagine a scenario where you're dying in a scene like this and there aren't staff members around. So there will be staff members around, to help sort of like get you back in. And once it's happened to you once or twice, and it'll probably happen to you if you're in combat, like people are going to die, and that's okay. You're not we'll like get to some of that in a minute, right? You're not dying does not carry an inherent risk of losing your character. We're that's a thing that we are telling people. There are other things that happen when you die, but you will not lose your character. um you stop playing your character when you decide to stop playing your character. um so um so yeah, you can take a couple minutes to be removed from the action. Then you can like return back in, right, and still be there, right? You're still part of the scene, you're still part of whatever's going on. You don't have to like, you're not going to miss a fight or miss the module because you took a death. um Once whatever it is over, right, like the field fight is over, you see the NPCs all with their weapons on their heads, out of breath, walking back up the hill to ops, right? It's over, you're in the module, and the scene is done and everybody's leaving the module together. At that point, now you got to make good on those deaths that happened, right? So after the action's over, now it's time where like you would fade, right? Hand on head, weapon on head, out of game. Now you're going to go, and then you'll go visit death, and you'll suffer a death for each time you died, right? So if you really like rack them up in there, right? Rack up 3 or 4 of them, you can go and like do all 3 or 4 deaths at the same time. um and um you don't have to do that, right? If you're like, look, like I died and like I'm kind of done with what's going on, then you can just like fade and go to death, and like that's your call. But we want to make sure that people know that there are options. That you know dying doesn't carry the penalty of not being able to participate, in addition to the character dying. um and so we'll call out where the death area is. um do we have, let's see, just finding where the other death description is. I think it's in the playing the game rules. Death strike, death. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we'll get to that in a little bit. We'll worry about the like playing the game portion of dying, what that means later. All right. But yes, when you die, you have options. You don't have to just like leave the module, leave the action, right? And then hopefully come back before it's done or something. Um, Okay, so there's a handful of effects in the rulebook that end when you're attacked. Confuse is on that list, and there's something else I think. Let us refer to the effects list. What could it be? I don't think it's repel. No, repel requires the user to release their effect before they can attack the target. So I guess it's primarily going to be confuse, and then anything else that you might have. any other like sort of plot card that you get that says this lasts until attacked. So just to define that, right? Until attacked means like ends when an offensive action is made towards you, right? There's like a spell packet or a throwing weapon coming your way. That breaks the effect, right? It's not being hit by it, it's being attacked by it, right? Somebody swings their weapon at you, you can like react or try to react or whatever, Um weapon use. So anyone can use any legal weapons to fight with. There's no weapon proficiencies that people have to buy. In fact, you're never buying individual skills in the rulebook as far as advancement goes. We talked about advancement, right? There's no skills to buy. So don't worry about that. So anyone can also use a shield whenever they want. One maximum of one shield. I don't know if it says that in there, but it's a maximum of one shield. And anyone can fight with two weapons if they want. Special rules here. Okay, so normally, like we've talked about, basic skills, basic ability uses get refreshed every minute, as long as or after a minute, you can take 3 uninterrupted seconds to recover, to refresh all of your basics, right? If you're fighting with a shield that's larger than 24 inches in diameter, or it's another shape with an area larger than 450 square inches, roughly, which is roughly the same size there. But basically, you're looking for a shape that roughly fits inside a 24-inch shield. So we're talking like bucklers and other like smaller shields. If you're fighting with anything bigger than that, then instead of the 3 seconds to refresh basics, it takes 10 seconds, which is much longer. 10 seconds can be an eternity in a fight. So just keep that portion in mind, and that rule will be generally true for monsters as well. Some monsters have different conditions under which their ability uses get refreshed. We'll put it that way. That will sort of like become apparent through gameplay. And then fighting with two weapons, if someone's fighting with two weapons and they're both longer than 36 inches, then also takes 10 seconds instead of 3 seconds to refresh basics. So a like 45 or 46 inch weapon in one hand and then like a 36 in the other, you're good. You're still just taking the 3 seconds. But if you have like two of the like long one-handers from B3, then it's going to take you a lot longer to refresh your basics. So two-handed weapons, right? A two-handed weapon held with both hands is immune to the withhold effect. The withhold effect normally requires you to be unable to attack with a weapon for the duration. Withhold will basically always be short, so it's basically always 10 seconds. But two-handed weapons are immune to withhold. So you'll call no effect if somebody hits your two-handed weapon with a withhold effect. And if you're wielding a two-handed weapon and one of your limbs becomes unusable, then you can still use the weapon to defend, but you can't attack with it, and it should be held vertically, right, while you're defending, right? It shouldn't be like and that's to prevent like swinging a weapon longer than 46 inches with one hand, really, in any direction, right? It's for control and safety purposes. You can also use a two-handed weapon with one hand defensively while you're casting a spell, because spell casting requires a free hand. And you can never wield a two-handed weapon in one hand and a one-handed weapon in the other, even if the two-hander is being used exclusively to defend. Armor use. Anybody can wear armor. Armor provides a number of passive return defenses against melee attacks. This is sort of like a fluid amount as we're going, because it only works in like sort of whole, right? You can't have like half a return, right? It's a whole thing or nothing. So like a regular like chainmail shirt, I say shirt, really like a chainmail vest, right, would be like 2 returns. And so you can sort of like compare that. If you just have like padded or like leather, right? If you're just like wearing like a gambeson or like like some kind of leather thing that just like covers the torso, that's like going to be worth 1. If you have something that simulates um like plate or something, that would be worth more than that. And then if there's other portions of the body that are also covered by armor, then you probably get like an extra 1 return or something. And then you can anybody can repair their own armor as a ritual, right? One uninterrupted minute. You can repair your own armor to regain all of those return defenses, as long as you're still wearing all the armor. And so let's talk about return now briefly. There's a section later that talks about it too, but we brought it up. So return is a limited immunity, basically. Our sort of like resist, dodge, and parry calls like totally negate an attack and it's still expended. Return is like a lesser version of no effect, basically. So if you hear return or no effect called in response to an ability that you used, then that ability is not used. Ability is considered unused. It's like you never used it. And so what return does is it makes your opponent land the attack again. So if they miss targets or you block it on the next time through, right, then it's still spent, right? So return is like a deferred defense. Yeah. And then no effect, sort of the same thing, but it like isn't all the time, right? If you hear something called no effect, then whatever you're doing will probably never work. But the thing that you tried to do wasn't spent when you tried to do it. All right, that's armor use. Ability use. Lots of effects do things that aren't damage, right? To use an ability, out of game statement must be made before your attack connects with your target. There's some abilities that have to strike a certain part of the body in order to be effective. Actually, let me go back to that last sentence, right? So the statement for the ability has to be made before your attack connects with your target. What that means is like you can be saying like 2 damage as you're swinging your weapon, right? It's sort of like is happening in the same instance, but like the call needs to like it'd be like 2 damage and I'm swinging 2 damage, and like you see it like 2 and like as I'm getting into that second part of the call, right, like the swing is happening. And the same thing with packs, right? It should be like magic 2 damage, and like I'm saying it as I'm throwing it, right? And the calls are relatively quick, right? They're not overly wordy most of the time, and so, but like the game call does need to be like completed. Like it's really like the call needs to be completed as the attack is being made, right? That's like the intention here is that most of the time that's what's it's what most people are used to. It's sort of like it will happen naturally, I think, as people are fighting, but that's the intention there. There's a handful of abilities that have to strike a certain body part to be effective. That's only true for weapon delivered attacks, so like melee and backstab stuff. Ranged attacks, right? Packet effects are effective no matter where they hit you. So like a packet maim that hits the torso still will maim a limb. And like a packet death that hits the leg will still be effective, even though a weapon delivered death has to strike the torso. And I think that's the only required torso hit in the game is death. We don't have like any real like required torso hits on things. Just the death, just the melee death call. So abilities are spent when the out of game call for the ability is made, whether it connects with the target or a required body part or not. So if I call a maim and I hit my opponent in the torso, that doesn't the maim doesn't do anything. So it'll still do a point of damage, right? I still hit you, and so it does a point of damage, but like my maim effect does nothing, and my maim is spent, right? Even though it didn't connect. If I have a packet called magic 5 damage and throw it and it doesn't hit anybody, it's still spent. Um, and there is like an effect that there's a call of retain that you could use in that instance to like reclaim your skill, but like it's relatively rare. But you know, it's sort of like the opposite of return, right? It gives you another chance to connect if you miss all targets. Blocking attacks, right? Blocking melee attacks with a buffer weapon will always stop the attack from affecting you. We'll get to the carry through effect later, right? This is the general rule. The carry through effect is a rule that's more specific, and so it overrides this rule. But if you block an attack with a buffer weapon or a shield, then it stops it. Unless it's something that specifically targets a weapon, like withhold or like dispel enchantment. And so if you deflect or partially block a weapon and then it connects, right, then it's considered blocked, right? If it like hits your shield, it bounces off and then hits your leg, right? It's blocked. Or if you like block it with your weapon, but it still sort of like goes through, or like, you know, the weapon like, right, it hits the weapon and then hits your arm, like it's still blocked. So this is to discourage people from swinging hard to swing through, because there's no benefit to it, right? Swinging through someone's block or weapon fouling or something is like not right, is not a there's no benefit to doing it, right? So don't. So if an attack connects successfully, that's when you would use like a dodge or a parry or a resist or something. And you get like 5 seconds after an attack hits you to like, you know, make a reactionary call. After 5 seconds, you just sort of take the effect and move on, and that's okay. So now I was saying about carry through. So giant creatures have carry through, or will have some number of, they will have access to the carry through call. It may not be on everything that they make, but so carry through will go along with something else, and so it could just be, the call could just be carry through accompanying a weapon swing from a giant creature, and that means that that weapon strike does a single point of damage even if you block it with a weapon or shield, right? So here we're like overriding that general rule with the specific rule. Carry through effects swung with a melee weapon go through weapons and shields. So you need to, like, giant creatures need to be fought differently. Right, the shield is generally unhelpful against the giant creature. And so like 2 carry through is 2 points of damage that goes through weapons and shields. Something that needs to strike a necessary target, like a disable or a maim. So like carry through maim. If it hits like the shield that's strapped to your arm, then that maim goes through the shield and into the arm. That, or if it hits a weapon, goes through the weapon and into the arm that was holding it. So and that'll all sort of make more sense too once you like see it happen once, right? Once you're on the field with it, it like makes sense. It's really like, don't get touched at all by a giant creature's weapons. So unarmed combat, quote unquote, we don't have any special rules regarding what buffers that represent natural weapons or unarmed combat or whatever. So people can use whatever they want, and it can, you know, you can have like a weapon and it can be representative of like whatever, you know, natural weapons or something. And they don't follow any rules that are different from any other weapons, you know, in the game. Let's see, unusable limbs, just sort of quickly here, right? A limb that's been subject to disable or maim can't be used. There's no game effect that requires you to drop anything that you're holding. So like a disabled or maimed arm can still hold a shield or a weapon, but the arm has to like hang at the side of the body, right? You can't move it. It just has to sort of hang there and do nothing. And that arm can't be used for defense, can't be used to cast spells. A creature with 2 unusable arms cannot use magic or touch effects at all. They can still use self effects. If you have like a self heal 2 or something, you could use that. But like, you can't deliver a touch effect to another creature if you don't have a usable arm, and no magic effects, even quick cast effects, if you don't have a usable arm. If you have an unusable leg, then you can't stand, but you can kneel, and you can move around by like kneeling or crawling. But if both of your legs are unusable, then you can kneel, but you can't move unless you like get on the ground and crawl. Um, Generally not going to be helpful in a combat scenario. All right. Abilities and ability usage. This is a lot of what we talked about before, specifically in the last video. But there are, so abilities come in 3 types: basic, complex, and ultimate. There are also attributes which is like, they're not really like abilities, and they're abilities, but they're not in the same way as like what we're talking about here. So basic abilities are the most common thing that people are going to use, right? It's generally like short effects that are like 10 seconds long, things that do like 2 points of damage or 2 points of healing, and like and maybe like cure, like you know, relatively innocuous effects, right? It might be like a cure pain, cure fear, um cure root, you know, stuff like that. So those are basics. And your complexes are things that generally do 5 of something, right? 5 damage, 5 healing. Might be like a flurry of 2 damage things. And those are going to be more serious effects, right? Stuff that lasts for a minute, or short versions of effects of serious effects. And then ultimates are like the big ones, right? It's like 10 points of damage, or like or could be like a minute long paralyze, or like a death, or a harrow. Big deal stuff like that. So like we've talked about, basics you get back, basically you get them back every minute, right? As soon as you have fewer than your number of maximum basic uses, a 1 minute timer starts. Once it hits 0, you can refresh yourself to your maximum number of basic uses by disengaging from combat and taking at least 3 uninterrupted seconds. That goes up to 10 seconds if you're using a shield that's larger than like a 24-inch circle, or you're using 2 long weapons. And there's no, I'll just put it bluntly, there's no way to get around that 10-second thing, right? Like, you're not like, oh, like I'll put a weapon down and then take 3 seconds and pick it back up. Once you're fighting that way, that's like the way that you're fighting for whatever you're doing. And so it becomes 10 seconds. There's no rule that allows for a loophole around that duration. And so we're just going to put it that way and leave it as rule as intended. There's no way to get around it. If you think you found a way to get around it, you didn't. There's no way to get around it. It is an intentional limitation put in place, to again work towards like safer and more fun combat. That's it. Complexes come back every hour on the hour. If we have like a big fight going on or something, staff members will try to be cognizant of watching the time, to remind folks, like be like, hey, it's we just hit the top of the hour, like everybody gets their ultimates back. And ultimates come back every sunrise, sunset, every twilight. So we are aware that, you know, and it's sort of intended that like there are complexes that like grant resistances. There's like a grant resist magic that shows up in there. And so like if you're about to hit the hour and you have you know, buffs to hand out to people, do it, right? Give people things to take into their next encounter with them. All right, so now attributes, right? Attributes are generally like all the time things that you have. Some of them have special rules, like the insight abilities and stuff. But generally, an attribute is something that you're going to have all the time. That will give you like an additional option, or make your character like a little more powerful or versatile in some way. All right, so ability delivery types now, right? Melee and backstab, which are sort of connected. Packet, touch, and self, which are connected. Gesture, social, and area. So every ability that shows up anywhere in the game will have a designation on how it can be delivered. So melee abilities are delivered with offer weapon strikes. Um, not with thrown weapon attacks, not with packets, only with a melee boffer. Strike has to connect cleanly without being deflected with an appropriate target, like we talked about. Backstab is a subcategory of melee. Also has to be delivered by boffer weapon strike, but you need to be behind your target's midline, and it has to strike the rear half of the body. And unless it's like a disable or a maim or a death or something, it can hit them anywhere. Like I can do like a backstab 5 and hit somebody in the back of the arm, and that's fine. It doesn't have to be a torso hit. Or hit them in like the back of the leg or something. Packet abilities are delivered by throwing a spell packet or a safe foam throwing weapon. If that projectile strikes a creature or any item that they're holding or wearing, then it's effective. So packet abilities require a usable arm that's not holding anything else in order to use them. You can't be like holding a sword and like throw a packet or something, right? We want people to be in control of what's going on. Projectiles that strike the head or groin of the target are not required to be taken. If that happens and somebody like doesn't, you can like, you know, if you like hit somebody by accident or something, they have the option of taking it. They might just take it anyway, right? If it was like a light packet throw, it might just be fine, and they might take it. If they don't, then that's their prerogative not to. If you sort of have a disagreement with that when it happens, like you can absolutely take that ability use back, right? Like that accidental hit, you can take that ability usage back. Touch effects. It's called touch effects to represent that you need to be like sort of within arm's reach of someone in order to do this. No one should be touching anybody without explicit consent to do so. And so you can touch a spell packet to someone. No, you can backstab with anything. You can backstab with two-handers. As long as you are behind the rear half of as long as you're behind the midline and the weapon strikes the rear half of the body, you can definitely do it with a pole arm, for sure. The backstab the pole arm backstab is I'm looking forward to seeing it. So touch abilities delivered like by touching a spell packet to somebody, right? Like touch a spell packet to like their shoulder or something, especially if there's like people fighting in front of you and behind them and you want to heal somebody, right? You can like touch a spell packet to their shoulder and be like, hey, magic heal 5. You can also be like within 3 feet, which is generally like most people don't have a reach of more than 3 feet anyway. So like basically being within arm's reach of somebody, and all you need to do is like hover an empty hand over them, right? You need like an empty or free hand to deliver a touch effect anyway. You just like hover your hand over them and tell them, as long, and that's like make sure that they know that you're there. But so touch effects go through, right, can't be negated by defenses. So but they're also like can only be used on like a willing or helpless target. And so what this means is like if somebody's like gives you like a grant resist magic, and then your buddy comes up behind you and is like magic heal 10, that doesn't set off your protection that you have, right? Right, you still get your magic protection in place. The only time this would come up for someone where it's like a non-beneficial effect that's being delivered via touch is like the animate effect. So like you can't really protect against that either. And so you might get animated as an undead creature. But that's the dangers of being an adventurer. So self effects, self are a subcategory of touch. These abilities can only target the user, so you only use them on yourself, but otherwise they follow all the rules of touch effects. You have to have a free hand to do self effects. You have to have a free hand, and oh wait, are we contradicting ourselves? Let me go to unusable limbs. Cannot use magic or touch effects, and then here, self subcategory of touch. We only target the user, otherwise follow all rules. All right. Otherwise follow all rules. All right. Well, rules as written. Self effects require a usable arm right now. Does that make sense? I'm gonna make a note. I'm gonna look through and see. Um, my gut says you can use self effects without a usable arm. um, but I'm just gonna I'll go through the skills that are in the rule book and make sure that it doesn't like there's nothing weird that allows to happen. But otherwise, I don't see any real reason to not allow that. Um, yeah, it should be fine. So uh, note, can self effects be used without a usable arm? Okay, great. Look at all the neat questions that we're trying to find answers to together. All right. Gesture effects. I'll preface this by saying that the design principle for gesture effects is to deliver roleplay effects and beneficial effects. There will probably be an instance where a gesture effect shows up and does something else, but there will probably be a very good story reason for it happening. Um, it is not the sort of thing that is on any monster manual entry. It is not the sort of thing that even like boss level monsters have like a, whatever, just like gesture thing. Um, the design of the rule system is for effects to generally be delivered by striking someone with a weapon or throwing a projectile at them and connecting. It's supposed to be that sort of physical aspect to combat. With that said, and like all the gesture effects that show up in the rulebook are all beneficial stuff anyway, right? It's like psychic healing, like via gesture, or like cure rage via gesture. Um, so that is generally where it will show up. Or you might have like a like plot effect that you like use on an enemy like by gesture. Like it just happens. Like you've done the prep work, right? You put the time in, now you're on the field. Like it just happens, right? You're like and we can sort of like make that moment stand out by doing it that way. But so unless otherwise noted, right, nobody can use more than one gesture effect per minute, basically, which is our per minute, and like per refresh all basic is like the same thing, basically, for all definitions except for one definition that we'll get to. But that other definition will not be something that comes up commonly for folks. But yeah, one gesture effect per set of basics that you have. Um, and you need to have uninhibited line of sight to the target, and they have to be able to clearly hear the effect call, right? And you should be pointing at them, and you should be designating to them in some way. Like if you're doing it to a player character, right, you should like call out their name, right? Um, be like, oh, like Bobby, psychic heal 10, right? And I'm pointing at him, and like I said their name, and so now now they know what's happening. um Social effects require an amount of like non-combat role play interaction with a target before you use them. This is generally shows up as like a suggestion thing, but also there's like a poison sleep that naturalists get to sort of like represent like like poison spores or whatever. There also might be some ones that show up like through the like toxicology crafting stuff, that are like poison like dusts. You like dust somebody with them like pocket sand style. um and uh and then like the brute gets like an intimidation style like social fear effect. So social effects are like the only thing where like if you hear one happen, you don't know that it happened. This is the only time we ask people to like ignore a call that they hear, unless you were like part of it. Then you like know what happened, and you should be like giving like a good sort of like explanation for what's going on. So yeah, their social effects are like the out of combat sort of like role play thing. um No, not rules as written. It's currently a single target thing. Let me make a note for. It's probably Um, Probably no reason to not let it do that. But yeah, yeah. I mean, it could certainly happen. The rule system supports that happening, without really any like big modifications to stuff. Just like a note in here that says like, a social effect can also have a targeting area like those that area effects have. Um, but I'll just put a note: can social effects, social abilities target more than one creature? The answer is probably yes. Um, Probably yes because it's fun. Is probably the answer there. Um, and then area effects affect all creatures within whatever the target area is. So that could be like 12 within the sound of my voice, 12 before me within the sound of my voice, which is everyone in front of the caster only. So if you like step in front of the line of people, or you like turn around away from the enemies and want to like give like a beneficial effect to your allies, right? Um, and then like to all within X feet of me, or like to all within this room, for like in like a module, and there's like a couple of rooms or something. um the ambient call is a storytelling tool, that lets people that hear it know that the effect that's about to be called, is not being created by whoever's calling it. So like staff members might be calling like the effects of what's going on. Like in a room, there could be a room that's like filled with poison gas or filling with poison gas, right? So there might be a call that's like ambient to all within this room, poison 2 damage. Right, to um yeah, toxic environment is the example that's in there. Or we might have like in NPC like out of game standing with like a magical next to a magical turret, throwing packets as the turret, right? The NPC itself isn't the source. The source is supposed to be like this item that's next to them. So be like ambient magic 5 fire, ambient magic 5 fire. Or it might just be like clarify all of these effects are ambient and then just magic 5 fire. Um Effect durations. There's 2 effects that have a duration of until removed: virus and mayhem. Everything else lasts a minute if it's just called, like right, disable, choke, harrow, weakness, repel. All lasts a minute unless it's delivered as short, in which case it lasts 10 seconds. There's some effects that are basically always short and will like never be called as not short, which is like pain and usually like pain, withhold, and nausea, really. So like if we use those as like 1 minute effects, well, as a reminder that we're intending to do that, we might be like pain 1 minute. um and then other durations are possible but rare. I guess if you tick off like a really nasty bad guy, and he like gives you the old like 5 minute pain or something, or like a really long duration harrow, because something's going on, then it would be like, right, would be like disable 10 minutes. And then you can always like use clarify to make sure that like an effect duration happens. If somebody's just like pain and you're like clarify is that a minute or 10 seconds, and they'd be like, oh no, it's definitely 10 seconds. Social effect durations, because social effects are out of combat, the rules for the durations are different. They last 5 minutes unless combat breaks out, in which case they last a minute or until removed, right? um and also like if it makes sense for you, if you like get targeted with like a suggestion effect or something, and you want to play it for longer than 5 minutes because it's fun, then you can do that too. um and so this has to be like combat that like your character's like sort of aware of, right, or like within what's going on. um and that also means if you like use like a suggestion, like a social suggestion, like on a guard to get into like a to like get into like the secret hideout, and then that guard hears combat breakout behind them, that'll break that early, right? Or if it's like a sleep effect and like combat breaks out, like they might wake up from the social sleep early. um just a thing to keep in mind. Defenses fall into 2 categories: active and passive. So passive defenses come from grant effects. Anything that's grant something is passive. whether it's grant armor, grant hit points, right? Those are just damage early. There's no choice to be made. Grant resist magic. The first non-touch effect with the word magic in it, you call resist to. It just goes off automatically. And like blade poisons are going to be like grant weapon, like melee poison inflict 2. And so that means like the first attack that you make with it, right? It's a passive thing that the weapon has now. The weapon has a single attack of poison inflict 2. Um, and then anything that's and so active defenses are any skill that a character has that's like resist something is like an active defense that the character is choosing to use, um, which requires like consciousness. Um, you like have to be conscious and able to use abilities in order to use it. Same thing is true for like parry and dodge and return, reduce. Those are all active defenses. So if you're suffering from an effect that does not allow you to use abilities, um, then you can't use any of those. So anything bestowed or anything that your character has, right, is like an active defense, right? Bestow parry, bestow resist magic, where you're choosing to use what effect to use the resist magic against. Um, those are all actives. Um, retain, like we talked about earlier, right? This is so the retain call comes into play when you use an attack and you miss all the legal targets of that attack, right? Then you can like refund your ability use back to yourself if you have something that allows you to use retain. So like if you use a backstab and it hits like the front of a person, you can call retain and you get it back. If like a melee death that doesn't hit the torso, you can call retain. If you throw a packet and it misses all possible targets, if you swing a weapon and you just whiff it completely, those are instances where you could retain something. You can't retain something that has a defense used against it, right? So like if you hit somebody and they call a parry, you can't retain that, right? Um, your ability use did something, right? It spent that parry or spent the resist or something already. Ability awareness, like we were saying, you know what's going on anytime an effect a game call is made, you know that it happened unless it's a social ability, in which case only the user and the target are aware that it happened. But everything else you can tell happened. Give it a good in-game explanation for what happened, and there's some examples in here, right? Also like you know like any numbers that are part of game calls aren't an in-game thing, but there's only a couple of numbers that show up in the game at all, right? It's all 1, 2, 5, and 10. So you could be like, oh, like that was like he was casting, whatever, he's casting like magic missiles, and they're like, oh, like how serious? And it's like, well, like about what like a regular spell or like a basic spell would be. Or if it's like, oh, he was casting a lot of like really dangerous spell, like big dangerous like bolts of magic, people can probably infer that those were tens. um Effect acknowledgement, we want everyone to be acknowledging every effect that happens, right? Every time you take a point of damage, there should be a reaction to it. Every time you take a game effect, there should be some kind of reaction. So if somebody doesn't acknowledge that an effect happened or make an out of game defensive call against it, then the ability is considered unused, even if the person took it, because there's no way for you to know. You should. We want everyone to know whether their attacks are being effective or not, at all times. All right, so now we get into some of the like little nitty gritty stuff here, and I'm gonna try to blow through some of this stuff relatively quickly. Some of it's stuff that we've talked about. All right, so lone abilities. We talked about this before. If you have like a lone melee 5 damage as a basic, then once per set of basics that you have, right? Sort of are like once per minute, but it's really once per refresh all basic. You can spend a basic to use that melee 5 damage ability, and you can't use it again until you refresh everything again. Also, lone abilities cannot benefit from tenacity attributes. Just to maintain some balance here. Um, um, ritual abilities. Ritual and short ritual abilities require an amount of uninterrupted time in order to use them. 10 seconds for a short ritual and 1 minute for rituals. We have a we have a note on uninterrupted, counts that we'll get to in a minute. Um, Tenacity is an attribute that lets you get a free use of the ability as long as it's of whatever you of the corresponding ability, as long as it's the next ability you use in the next 10, and it has to be used within 10 seconds. Um, so like magic heal 2 tenacity means that anytime you're calling magic heal 2 from anything, it could be from a potion or a scroll or an ability you use or whatever, regardless of where it's from, then you can do it again for free, but it has to be the next thing you do and within 10 seconds of the first one. So interrupting and miscasting abilities. So there's aren't many things that sort of interrupt a thing once it's used. So melee type abilities, not striking a required target, right? Disable, maim, withhold, death. Um, uh, those are like ineffective in a to basically. Ritual abilities are interrupted if the criteria of the uninterrupted count is not met, right? Such as like getting attacked during that time. Magic type abilities have special rules listed in spellcasting. If you state an effect call incorrectly, then the ability is miscast, right? If you realize that you miscast something, you should just say miscast and it's considered unused. And also, like stating effect calls so quickly that they can't be understood will also cause your abilities to be miscast. So the target has to be able to reasonably understand the entire effect call, right? So like, magic 2 damage at like a regular sort of speaking pace, right? That's where you want your calls to be, right? So that people can understand what's going on. Spell casting. So all magic type abilities require an incantation to use. We know that quick cast breaks that rule, but that's the specific rule that overrides the generic rule. So due to the verbal component of spell casting, the silence effect prevents the use of these abilities, even quick cast, right? So silence means you cannot use any magic abilities, nothing with the word magic in it while you're silenced. Exact incantation is left up to the caster. Minimum 7 syllables, starts with the word I, and then after that, then the out of game effect call, right? So I call forth a bolt of flame, magic 2 fire, right? I rack you with agony, magic short pain. During the incantation, your spell can be interrupted if you're subject to any harmful effect, regardless of source, or if it was negated by a defense. You can still block it. Do tenacity abilities count toward number of uses? So tenacity does not spend an additional like ability use. So if I have like magic heal 2 tenacity, so like I would have I might have like magic heal 2 tenacity as an attribute. Like tenacity is like shows up as an attribute somewhere. And then if I like have magic heal 2 tenacity and I use that, right? Like I mend your wounds together, magic heal 2. That activates tenacity. I like probably spent a basic to do that. And now I have like a free one that I can do in the next 10 seconds. And I might be like, okay, like I'm just gonna heal the same guy again, or I'm gonna heal myself, right? Like I healed this person, like I mend your wounds together, magic heal 2. I have to pause for a second because I just did a game call, and then like target myself, I mend my wounds together, magic heal 2. I spent whatever it was to activate the first one, I spent, whether it was an item or an ability use, and then the second one was just free. Does not count toward anything really. Um, right. So spell casting, we do the incant, then add a game effect call, and you get like a couple of seconds if you want to like incant your spell and then like take a second to like throw it or whatever. Um, but like once you finish your incant, you have like 3 seconds to like make the effect call and like throw a packet. So for packet magic effects, the packet is thrown at the same time the add a game effect call is made. Throwing it earlier is miscast, but So yeah, as long as you're like, I like our example, right? I call forth a bolt of flame, magic 2 fire. Um, that's fine. I guess the other thing to keep in mind is that for purposes of interrupting spells, from the moment you start your incant, right, that first syllable, the like I portion of it, until the time you start making that out of game call, like to throw it, that's the interruptible portion, right? So like I call forth a bolt of flame, I get hit in the arm, interrupted. Um, I call forth a bolt of flame, block an attack with my shield, magic 2 fire. You're still good to go, right? It has to hit you. But like I call forth a bolt of flame, and then I'm getting hit with a packet in the shield. My casting's interrupted. Um, so just need folks to like sort of use their best judgment on all of that. We do allow incants in languages other than English. It has to be a real language or like either a real world language, or like a conlang that is like sort of fully formed enough in order to make sentences out of. So we're not allowing just like groups of syllables that don't have meanings to be used. Um, the game effect calls will still be in English. Um, quick cast, like we've talked about before, and a quick cast magic effects don't require an incant to use. So like the basic magic user level 1 ability, that's um, packet quick cast magic 2 damage. You just call magic 2 damage and throw the packet, right? That can't be interrupted, right? Because there's no incant for it. So that's not interruptible. But still can't be used while silenced, even though it doesn't have an incant, right? There's still like whatever verbal component to the spell casting that's like represented by the game call, sort of, right? Um, you can willingly release any effect that you place on a creature with an in-game statement of like, oh, I release my pain spell, or like whatever. It can only be done for effects that have a duration, um, and that duration is shorter than until removed. And you can't release beneficial effects from people, right? So if you like paralyzed an enemy and now you're like, oh, I paralyzed the wrong guy, you can like be like, I release my paralysis, um, and let them out of the effect early. We're gonna skip crafting. Crafting is straightforward, and people are gonna learn about it at game. What do we have? Oh, there's a lot here. All right, we can get through this in 20-ish minutes. All right. Playing the game. So this is like additional rules that sort of like will help everything make sense. So going out of game, being out of game is represented by putting your hand on your head, putting a weapon on your head. If you see people that are out of game, ignore them. They're not there. You'll see like NPCs doing this, like to go back to ops after they've died, or to like recycle to like play a monster again and stuff after they're defeated in combat. You might see us like moving around out of game to like go and set stuff up. We'll generally do our best to like be out of sight, but you might still like see us like on the far side of the field, like carrying bins out into the woods or something, and like we'll try to like have our hands on our heads and stuff to indicate that. Um, Also, if at any time somebody's uncomfortable with the situation that they're in, or just like isn't having a good time, like everyone at the game is empowered to just like go out of game and leave the situation, like no questions asked. A staff member might follow up with you just to make sure everything's okay. um but um but yeah, you can just like go out of game and leave a situation if you need to. um we also have a sort of like we have like a thumbs up thumbs down system to like check in with people and make sure that like if there is like a intense scene that's going on, which a lot of people have indicated that they are interested in participating in that sort of role-playing encounter thus far through player profiles. So thank you to everybody that's filled those out so far. We might, you can check in with folks and like sort of like give them the thumbs up, and like are we good here, and they might respond like also with a thumbs up that's like, no, we're good, like we can keep going, or a thumbs down that's like like let's move along to a different thing, right? Let's sort of like stop this thing that's going on, maybe like move along to a different topic, or just like end the interaction entirely. Just sort of like be cognizant of people around you, right? And don't like hesitate to check in with people. Um, Especially if it's folks that like you haven't played games with before and stuff. And we'll be doing the same thing like as staff, to just like check in with people and make sure that that folks are okay. So now to some more combat rules. We talked about no effect in return, right? That means that whatever you did wasn't effective, but you got the ability refunded to you. If return is the call, then that's like a finite amount of resistance. And it's like some kind of temporary immunity to whatever was happening. The full on no effect call is really like an indication of that whatever you're doing will never be effective, right? Like for some reason it's not going to work. So try something else. In either instance, your ability is refunded to you as if it was never used. Doesn't matter if it's from an item or a bestowed ability or whatever ability use like you get. It's as if you never used it. So Death Strike. Now we get back to Death Strike, right? It's a uninterrupted 3-second count. You need to hold a weapon or a spell packet like to like the torso of a willing or helpless creature, usually because you like knock them down to 0 hit points and now you want to like finish them off. Right, you do it regular voice, 1 call per second, Death Strike 1, Death Strike 2, Death Strike 3. If you finish it, you finish the call, then whatever it is dead. If it's something that can be killed, if it's not, it'll tell you. It'll say no effect. And so a Death Strike is interrupted if the user, so the person delivering the Death Strike, or the target, the person being death struck, is subject to any effect, including a weapon strike, even if it's resisted, reduced, has no effect, or strikes something that's being held by either person, right? So there's no need to strike like the weapon that's resting on somebody, right? You can hit the person's shield, if they're like holding a shield or whatever. You just have to do something. You can hit like the leg of the person that's being death struck, and that interrupts it. The whole system has to be completely uninterrupted and you know unaffected by anything else, right? It's like a full 3-second stop, and the person doing the death strike like can't move their feet. That's all you're doing while you're doing the death strike. Right, has to have their feet planted for the duration of the call. Yeah, so creature killed this way begins their 5-minute fade count, like we talked about before. Creatures that aren't alive, like undead, are probably not going to be affected by a death strike under normal circumstances. You'll get a response of no effect. Any numerical damage packet effect can be used to deliver a death strike and will be of the energy type of that attack. You could also like spend a energy type attack that you have. No, that's only true with packets. Only true with packets and enchanted weapons. Yeah. So like a packet effect could do a like if you're like an adept and you have like your elemental packets, right? You could spend one of those to perform an elemental killing blow of that element, right? Fire, ice, or lightning. Yeah. Yeah, that all tracks. Okay, so death. If your character dies and is not brought back to life with a life spell, you'll ultimately have to go to the death area at some point, right? We talked about it before. You have some options, but generally, when you're there, you will independently, right? You don't need a staff member there for death. Sometimes we might have a staff member there for death, but generally, you'll go there and independently follow the process. So we want people to know there's no way to permanently lose your character unless you decide to. The consequences for death are communal across like the game, so that will become apparent as people die. What it means. There's sort of like the total number of player deaths will be tracked, and that will contribute to certain things maybe happening or not happening. So it's in everyone's best interest to look out for everyone. It is a community goal is do not rack up a death count, but also you know, it's not like punishments that are going to happen. It's just sort of like a so like we don't want people getting mad at other people for dying, because generally players are going to die because the staff did a thing and not because, of any other reason. But um we will also in the death area have an optional set of like death penalties that you can pull a card from if that's fun for you. Or you're like, you know what, like I died in a dumb way and I should like definitely be punished for that a little bit. Then you can like pull a card, or you're like, oh, like I decided ahead of time going into this module that like if I died in there, then I was gonna like pull a penalty card because I wanted to like I want to raise the stakes for myself. Um so uninterrupted counts uninterrupted counts follow the same rules as death strikes, except you can walk around, right? You can't run, but you can walk. So if you're like activating like a short ritual ability, you need 10 uninterrupted seconds where nothing hits you or anything you're holding, right? And you're not running. So any of that stuff will interrupt a ritual ability. So if you're trying to defend somebody who's doing like a short ritual life spell on someone, you need to make sure that that person and the body they're trying to resurrect are not touched by anything, right? That's like your goal now, is to like keep everything away from them for 10 seconds to do their thing. Effect types. So we have like effects, right? Which is like pain, withhold, whatever, weakness. We have energy types that we'll talk about in a second, which is like ice, fire, lightning, silver. And now we have effect types, which is like either nothing, general, right? Magic, poison, psychic. So the instances where we've been talking about like, oh, magic 2 damage. Magic is the effect type. Psychic heal 10 is a psychic effect type. Poison inflict 2. That's poison type. And so there can be resistances that people have that's like resist magic, resist poison, resist psychic. And that's where those things come into play. Also, they might affect different kinds of creatures differently. Different creatures might be more or less susceptible to different kinds of deliveries. Energy types, basically the same thing. For most player characters, most of the time, none of these will work differently on you. But something can have an energy type and an effect type, right? Magic 2 fire, short ice disable, poison lightning fear. I don't know where I came up with that, but it could happen. Could be some kind of like weird monster that does it that way. But yeah, you could if you have like resist lightning or like reduce lightning, could reduce like any lightning effect down to a single point of damage. There's lots of options, right? Your character could be better at defending against certain kinds of elements. Enchanted weapons. And each weapon can hold a single enchantment at a time. Enchantments last for 10 minutes. It's sort of like a special duration outside of our normal duration, our normal effect durations. Enchanted weapons only use their element on called effects. So there will never be just a call of fire with a weapon swing, like, or ice or lightning or silver or whatever. But it does let you turn like a 2 damage into 2 fire. Allows you to turn a short disable into a short fire disable. Allows you to turn a death strike into a fire death strike. So it can modify any weapon attack that's being made with it, even ones that already have an energy type. So if you're like, I don't have melee 2 fire, but I have melee 2 silver, and you're holding a fire enchanted weapon, then you could call 2 fire or 2 silver when you make that attack. It's also optional all the time, right? So if I have a fire enchanted weapon, I swing 2 fire at an enemy and it goes absorb to heal 2. You're like, oh, I shouldn't make fire attacks anymore, probably. You can just you don't have to swing. You just be like, oh, what about 2 damage? And thing might be like, you got me. And you're like, okay, never mind. Not doing the fire thing anymore. So weapon enchantment provides an option for you to add that energy to any game call you're making with an attack being made with that weapon. So item representations. Okay, so whenever possible, we will represent items with an object approximating the item in question. Just trying to remember what section this was. So some items are represented by tags for simplicity and convenience. The general like materials that are used for crafting and the consumable items that are created via crafting are in the process right now of being printed on reusable plastic cards. Um, so right now there's no paper tags in the game. um, and our plastic cards look pretty nice too. Um, right now there's no paper tags for anything. At some point we'll have to have them because we can't always know in advance what's going to happen there. We will do our best to like not use paper tags whenever possible. But every once in a while one's going to show up. There's just not a whole lot we can do about that. uh, Weapons and shields and armor don't have tags. The items are the items and represent themselves. Also, personal props can never be taken from player characters. Do not touch anyone else's weapons, shields, armors, or other personal props. If somebody's in combat and like drops their weapon, do not kick it or pin it or anything. Never move, pin, or kick weapons during combat. NPC weapons and shields and armor are worthless and cannot be taken. If you search an enemy, we'll get to searching, like they will give you everything of value that they have. And so if you don't get a tag that represents something, you might get like a level 1 inorganic material, and it's like, oh, like this is their scrap weapon that I just looted off of this guy. It's definitely worth scrap. Wink. But otherwise it's just like wasn't worth taking for whatever reason. Everyone decided it wasn't worth taking is a thing that could just just to keep things simple. You can, if the situation calls for it, you could be like, hey, like I like take your weapons, like I don't take them, but like I make it so that you don't have access to them. That's fine. But like you can't just like take the weapon and like run away with it or something. Don't do that. So game items, you will generally find a material on the back of the card. It will say Travail material with the game logo, and on the front it'll tell you like level X, and then the material type, right? So it'd be like level 1 esoteric, level 2 elemental, level 3 profane, whatever. And then you might find a or or there will be like a consumable item. It will say Travail consumable on the back of it, and that might say, like lesser healing, level 1 potion, touch, heal 2. And now you know that you can expend that. It says consumable, so it's a single use item, and you can use it to deliver the touch heal 2 effect once. Once items are used, they go back to you can dump them back in the used item receptacle, like in the tavern, and then we will return those cards. Will get returned to the containers where people that craft things take their completed items from. So you go to the tavern, you turn in your components that you looted off of stuff, and then you go into the bin and find the item that you just made and take it, then use it, and then put it back also in the used item thing, and then we will periodically refile everything and collect things so that we can send stuff out again for people to use. This is the circle of reusable tags that we'll be doing. Extraordinary items are like magic items and special things that might let you use additional abilities. They'll have symbols on the cards for them and a single character can't use 2 items with the same symbol within the same event. So if you have like 2 items that both have a square on them, right? Like let's say you have like a wand of healing and a wand of magic missile, and they both have a square symbol on them. You can only use one within a given event. So um, it most behooves you to give one to a buddy to use or sell it or something, right? Um, it will be more useful to you for another person to have an item as well as you than for you to have two and only be able to use one. Searching bodies. So uh, any creature that's asleep, unconscious, paralyzed, dead, or willing can be searched, right? You just like go over to them and say, I search you. You should be like, if it's like a creature that's down, you should be like kneeling or bending over the body, right? You don't need to touch anybody to search them. You just say like, I search you or I search this body. Um, they'll start um, they'll start counting to 30, at which point they'll hand over all of the in-game items that they have, unless there's like some special circumstance going on where like if they have items that are protected somehow, they won't hand those over. um, but that's not a thing that's represented in the rule book, but it's a thing that can happen. um, you know and we will address that in game when it comes up. It'll be a fun thing that we do. um, so uh so the vast majority of the time you'll go over to body and say I search you, and what will happen, we're going to sort of cut to the end here, right? If you um like almost all npc monsters will just hand over their loot faster than 30 seconds when they're searched, but it could take up to 30 seconds, right? If they're like, oh man, like I don't know what pockets this in or whatever, like do not get frustrated with them. They can take up to 30 seconds, and sometimes we might do that if there's like a timed thing going on or something. But um there are also a number of circumstances where like you might drop a monster, death strike them, search them, get a couple of coins and like a material or whatever, um and and then like they'll just hand you the stuff and then they'll like go out of game so they can be another monster or something. um so uh uh so the other option that might happen is a staff member, and only a staff member, might be like, oh, like go ahead and search, or might be like, oh, go ahead and search, and like hand you their pouch or something, and now you can like go through the pouch or the bag or something and like pull the stuff out, right? um if you don't want to do that, then you just say I search you again, and we do the 30-second count. um we currently don't have rules for describe your search. So when you search an enemy, they will not say that. If they do, just say I search you again. um, it's a rule that some other rule systems have, but we'll be as explicit as possible with folks that that's like not part of our rule set. Um, so searching player characters. Under normal circumstances, player characters will not and cannot be searched. So a player character cannot search another player character and take items from them without their permission. You might have, you and like your friends might be, right? If you like find somebody down in the woods and you like don't have any healing abilities, you might be like, oh, like I search you for a healing potion, and then that person can be like, oh, okay, cool, hadn't considered that somebody might like come along and try to like use my own healing potion on me, and they might be like, you find this like for, like for the purposes of like, you know of healing me, right? The intention there isn't like, oh, I can search other player characters if I ask them for specific items that they might have. The intention is like, if you're searching someone for a healing potion, or like, oh, like I search you for like resurrection scrolls or like life potions, and they're dead, then they might be like, oh yeah, like you find this, and the intention is clearly that it gets used on them. So the other instance where a player might get searched is enemies might search you for like a specific item or something, unless you're like told otherwise, right? Maybe you go to like, I don't know, you go to like stealing world where everything is stealable, and you might like know that going in or something. We might like make a gimmick out of it, um but like you might be, you know in like a module where it's, or an encounter where it's like, oh, we're trying to like, whatever, gather blue crystals, and then like an enemy might drop you and be like, oh, I search you for blue crystals, right, to like take them because the enemies are trying to get them too. So there are instances where things like that could happen, but it's not going to be like you get dropped and it's like, oh, like I search you and I'm taking all of your coins and materials and game items and whatever. So other than those circumstances, right, your game items and coin are safe on your person, really safe wherever. I would recommend not just like leaving stuff out, like in the tavern or in public spaces. Um, but like if you can store your stuff under your bed, you can store your stuff in your bag. As long as it's not like a thing that we told you like needs to be kept on your person at all times or something, which would be like a plot specific item for some reason. Um, you can leave your stuff wherever and it's safe. So representing abilities, we specifically didn't like name all the spells that magic users get and stuff. It's not like, oh, this is magic missile and this is like ice arrow and this is, fireball. Um, we want people to sort of come up with like what their own abilities are called and like what makes sense for their characters and what their techniques and spells might be called and stuff. Um, so like we really want people to like own that part of their character too and like do something fun with it. If that's fun for you, do something fun with it. If it's not fun for you, then you can just sort of not do that part. But if it's fun, then that you can like add an extra facet to your character by doing that. What do we got? We still got a couple. All right, I'm really gonna try to power through this in the next like 10 minutes. All right, lethal effects. Any effect with a duration that's shorter than until removed can become lethal. A lethal effect causes whatever the effect was. Short lethal pain is a 10-second pain effect. And if that pain effect is not cured before the 10 seconds are up, then you die at the end of it. The There can never be a lethal maim or lethal virus because and there's some stuff that just like doesn't make sense. We're not gonna do like a short lethal withhold unless like there's something weird going on. I guess maybe if like you like merge with your weapon symbiotically and it's like a living part of your body, then maybe we could do that or something weird. But like that's generally not going to happen. Um, but yeah, anything with a duration can become lethal. The only sort of weird rule in this is with Harrow, because Harrow is like sort of like goes off like reactionary when you take damage. So a lethal Harrow, instead of dropping to 0 hit points when you take hit point damage, you die the next time you take hit point damage. So that's just like a fun little, just a fun little thing that can happen. All right, so effect to effect. This is usually like this shows up on like Slayer, where it's like Death Strike to Self Heal 2. Where like if you successfully deliver a Death Strike to something, right? Death Strike 1, Death Strike 2, Death Strike 3, and they don't call no effect, then you can spend a basic and you can like heal yourself for 2. And there's other stuff. This is just sort of like a contingent thing, right? Like so the first effect has to be successful in order for the second thing to happen. Right. And if the first effect is unsuccessful for any reason, the second effect does not happen, and ability use is expended as normal. But like in the instance of like Death Strike, the response is going to be like no effect, or it's going to work. So, and no effect would refund your ability use anyway. But if you had something that's like, first effect is unsuccessful, the second effect does not happen, and it's expended. Yeah. Okay. If you have like a melee 2 damage to self heal 2, right? And you like 2 damage and you whiff it, then you don't get the self heal 2 on the other end of it. Effect as effect attributes. We talked about this a little bit last time. This gives you another option when you use the relevant ability. So like magic heal as psychic heal means anytime you would use any effect that you are about to call and say magic heal whatever, you could instead make that psychic heal instead. So this means that like the generic like sort of touch magic heal 2, you can turn that into touch psychic heal 2, which would mean that you no longer need to make an incant. Right? You can just call psychic heal 2 instead. What that does mean though is that you can't ever use like 2 attributes on a thing that happened. So you might have like touch magic heal 2 tenacity. So if you use it as the touch magic heal 2, now you like get another one for free, but you have to incant both of them and you need to not be silenced. if you turn it into a touch psychic heal 2, then no incant, but you're not going to get to double it. Um, so those are just sort of things to keep in mind, right? Counter, we talked about the counter effects. Countering melee, packet, and social effects requires you to be within arm's reach of the target that was hit, and then you can spend your counter ability to negate that effect for them, right? It's like being able to like dodge or parry for the guy standing next to you. Within line of sight to the target for countering gestures, you have to be able to see the person that's being targeted. And within the area of effect to counter areas, to counter area effects. Social effects can only be countered by counter social. And for those purposes, like if you have access to counter social, you know when a social effect is happening as long as you decide to use counter social, which is it's like sort of a catch 22. But well, no, it's sort of like the opposite of a catch 22. So if you decide to use counter social, then you knew there was a social effect. If you decide not to use it, then you don't know that the social effect was happening. Yeah. Selectively very aware of social situations, and then and that can only be counter social, even if you have like counter fire and the guy next to you is affected by like social fire pain or something. You can't counter fire that, right? With your counter fire, it has to be specifically counter social. The same is true for area effects, has to be counter area for those. And that's just to make it so that area effects and social effects happen more often than they don't. So ability and attribute stacking here, right? You could, like I was saying, you only use one attribute, right? So right, tenacity attributes do not apply to abilities modified by effect as effect, right? Like we were talking about before. If you have packet magic as backstab magic and backstab as melee, then you don't have packet magic as melee magic, right? That's not, because you would be stacking two attributes in a line together, right? There's a note here on the suggestion effect. So suggestion effect is specifically designed for role-playing purposes to represent like misdirection, smooth talking, like a smooth talking answer to like, you know, like talk your way into like the right, like the suggestions on here, like I'm an ally or like I'm a member of this group. Like I know the password, you don't need me to tell you, wink. You know, like, oh, like you never saw us and you like get, you know, like your 5 minutes to like make your getaway. Right. Oh, I was promised safe passage, like I'm, you know, or like so and so is like a friend or an enemy or whatever, right? Like you can use it for other stuff, but like this is generally the thing that's here, right? It's anybody can be immune to suggestion at any time if they don't like what's happening. So and suggestion cannot be used by a player character on another player character without everyone being in agreement of what's going on. So you can always just call no effect to suggestion. And number two, players shouldn't be trying to do it to other players without being like, hey, like I'm gonna do this. Is that okay? Basically, no one's agency of their character is taken away without their decision, you know, without their consent to do so. Effects from plot cards. The list of effects that we have is specifically for combat effects. There's all kinds of other stuff that might happen to you outside of combat. And when that happens, there'll be a plot card that you get that describes what's happening. That's like normal. This is going to happen. Sometimes those effects will be removed by special means that are different from normal stuff. It might say like, oh, can be removed by a cure effect. So like a generic cure can remove one effect, or like cure all would remove all harmful effects on somebody. But otherwise, like if it doesn't say that, then cure won't remove it. And it can be, who knows, it could be anything. Would ask you to like role play whatever it is that's going on. There's stacking effects are here. I don't know if the rune portion on here is relevant anymore. It sort of is. But Runes are not as common as they almost were. Runes like sort of do a different thing now that y'all will see once we get some item cards in. We'll show off some pictures of what some of the items are going to be. But so bestowments that you get, right? Those are active things. You can have one active defense and one use of an ability bestowed on you. The same effect twice never works. You can't refresh the duration of a thing on somebody. If someone has a disabled limb and someone hits their limb with another disable, you should call return to let the person know that they're getting it back. But also, like, it's probably also apparent that you're under an effect already. So you can't take it again. You can't keep somebody like sleep affected like over and over and over again or whatever. And they're the one that gets to count the duration, not you. Even if you're looking at your watch, right? You shouldn't be counting durations for other people. Grants, you get one passive defense, and then you can have one instance of hit points, one instance of armor points. Weapon enchantments, weapons can have one enchantment at a time. Runes, if you find a way to put runes on things, you only get one, and it factors into the other effect stacking rules. Bestow or grant to item, right? So like we were talking about, poisons would be like touch, grant, melee poison, inflict 2, right? So as a touch effect, you're granting a weapon a melee poison inflict 2. And so a weapon can have a single bestow or grant at a time. A grant would happen on the first attack with it. A bestowment would be whenever the user chooses. And then harmful effects, the same effect twice. Harmful effects should only be under an effect a single time. Yeah, it's in there twice. Okay. Let's just make a quick note here. That's a little redundant. Stacking section is redundant for harmful effects. All right. Point still stands that you only harmful effects don't stack themselves. Total hit points, a player character total number of hit points and armor points from everything combined can never go above 20. 20 is the sort of the cap on numerical things that can happen. So 20 is going to be it. So the discover effect is a way for people to ask questions about the game world and plot and other secrets and get some answers. There'll be more information that will be publicly available to every character during the first event on exactly how this system works. But this is the mechanic. It's done during game. You'll fill out the discover form. You'll drop it in the box. The staff will respond to it between events, and we will give you a response at the next event that you attend. Generally, this will be done by magic user and devout primary path characters via circle or ceremony. Insight attributes can modify discover requests and make them better in certain ways. So blue insight is for represents like being able to ascertain specific information, so like names of people and places and or dates of when things happen and stuff. Also, if you have the blue insight attribute, then you can use an additional ultimate once during the event, whenever you choose. Red insight includes information regarding dangers, like impending threats or warnings about things. Also, if you have red insight, then once per twilight, you can use a dodge. Golden insight, I think this is only on performer. It's sort of at a high level. This is like a special one, right? So it enhances the discover and it ties your character to the subject somehow, like left up to staff discretion. If used to aid another character in one of their pursuits, expect the outcome to further their progress and not your own. So like you can't use this to like connect yourself to somebody else's personal plot or something like that, right? It's supposed to be it'll be interesting. We'll see how this one pans out. really. It will probably change at some point, but I'm interested to see what happens with it before we make any modifications to it, because I think the idea is neat. But we'll see what happens. Circle and ceremonial magic. Back to magic users and devout primary path characters have the ability to do this. There's a couple in the rule book of things that you get that are just sort of like extra abilities that you can do, and uh, you will find more during gameplay too, that are sort of like extended, like what would normally sort of be considered like a ritual. Um, um, are like circle spells for magic users and ceremonial spells for devout magic users, and yeah, we'll they can do all kinds of stuff. They'll do special plot things. They'll produce additional game effects that you otherwise normally wouldn't be able to do. Um, and unless it says it on it specifically, you can just perform them. Some of them might require material components, and they'll tell you to like put them in like the used item receptacle in the crafting area or whatever when you use them. Um, but it's up to you to determine if you perform the steps correctly. You can ask somebody to sort of observe whatever you're doing. Some of them might just say like spend a minute doing a thing like this and just ask you to sort of like role play things, in which case do it in whatever way sort of like makes the most sense for your character. um yeah. Modules, right? We're gonna we have a bunch of spaces that will be module space. We'll describe them at game. Modules are like when you go to a you're gonna go to a location that's not in like the normal gameplay area, right? So the game takes place in the Travail, um and a bunch of like the camp is just going to be always in game and accessible. But let's say you're going to travel to another world, right? We'll set that up like in one of the module spaces so that you can go there and travel to another space. um Locks and traps are going to be will be represented by physical challenges. What that means is like a lock on a box will be a lock on a box. um Many of them will be relatively easy to open. If it requires anything beyond like a bobby pin or a bent paper clip or whatever, then we will have tools there um for folks to use. There's no skill required to like pick a lock. Anybody that can do it can do it. We'll have opportunities for people to learn about how to do it too. So if you're somebody that sounds like fun for, start brushing up on that, and look forward to it. Any traps that we have will be like some kind of actual like trapped thing. We might have like lines running across, and there might be a card that says like, oh, like if you touch one of these lines, or like a hanging thing or whatever, like if you touch this, then this is the effect that happens. So you will have the opportunity to be able to just physically avoid them. They won't be the sort of things where like you see a card that says like, oh, like there's just like you know I mean, you might encounter a card that says like when you do this thing, like you pick up the statue from the pedestal, and there's like a magical explosion triggered by that. um but for other for the most part, like these things will be represented physically in some way. um and then there's secret plot cards. If you encounter a plot card that says secret on it, you have to use identify. Was it secret or hidden? I think I messed up my terminology somewhere along the line here. That's interesting. um Secret or hidden? I thought it was hidden. Oh, doing good tonight. All right, where is it? Identify. Oh no, secret. Yeah, it's secret, not hidden. Why did I think hidden? I don't know. Let me just double check and see if that shows up in. I think I'm thinking of searching bodies are hidden items. Yeah. Okay. Yep. No, it's secret. I was right. So there'll be plot cards that say secret on them. And you have to use the identify ability. Scoundrels and magic users get it. Then you can open up the card and look at it. You can either leave it open and then anyone can look at it, or you can set it back to like the secret. You can close it up and leave a secret on top. And there might be good reasons to do that sometimes. But yeah. All right. That's the rule system. That again took longer than I thought it would. But that is a full breakdown that it now exists for reference purposes. Thank you so much, everybody that tuned in and watched. We're going to do our best to condense some of this down to make a simpler guide for folks that want to just like sort of jump in. But I certainly do recommend that if people have the time and ability between now and the event, you recommend to people that they listen in for a full description of not just the rules, but the intention of the rules here. We also went through all of the normal ability lists. Next week will be our last office hours before the event. The week of game is going to be really busy with us trying to prep everything for our first event. But next week I will go over the prestige paths and the game effects, and continue to answer any questions that people have. Get those characters in, get worlds in. We'll be approving. I think without modification or with minimal modification, basically everything that folks have submitted so far is in the queue for approval. We're just waiting to sort of dot I's and cross T's in our internal process on that. And yeah, otherwise, 2 weeks and 3 days from now, we will be finishing up check-in, and we'll be ready to do an opening meeting where we're going to go over a bunch of stuff anyway there. But if you were here, you've got a sort of a head start on that. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a good night. Have a good rest of your week. Have a good couple of weeks. I hope to see everybody ever at at Travail in 2 weeks, and we're gonna have a wild time. You're not gonna want to miss it. It's gonna be a good one. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Good night.